Hello to the Measure O Citizen Oversight Committee, members of staff, and the public that are listening to this presentation. This is Sherry Klima, I'm your Deputy City Manager, and I'll be presenting on determining whether to continue to wean off of Measure O. The recommendation is that the Measure O Citizen Oversight Committee discuss and provide feedback as to what the city should do regarding Measure O weaning. So you will recall that Measure O will terminate in 2029, and in early 2020, we decided it was time to begin weaning ourselves off of that revenue stream for two reasons. First of all, the city has debt payments due past the sales tax's sunset, so they're due all the way through 2031. And we wanted to ensure that the city can cover those debt payments and not dip into the rest of the general fund. So in order to do that, the city needed to build up the fund balance of Measure O in the few years before its sunset date. And then the second reason is that at Measure O's termination, all the ongoing programs would have to be moved to another funding source if we wanted to continue them. And so the weaning effort was intended to make that reabsorption process smoother. In early 2020, staff told you that, and told the council that assuming no new projects and new expenditures, this would be the schedule that of required savings reabsorptions, again, from Measure O fund to the general fund, reductions and cuts that would be required per fiscal year. So in fiscal year 2021, $801,000 of Measure O ongoing programs would have to be either cut or reduced, or there would have to be some sort of savings or moved into the general fund, and so forth. If we stuck to this schedule, we were confident that we could make the debt payments all the way through 2031, and that all of the ongoing programs would be moved to the general fund or cut or otherwise addressed. That weaning schedule that we gave you in early 2020 assumed the then forecasted revenue in Measure O according to what you see on your screen now. So that schedule assumed that in 2020, 2021, the revenue that would be coming in from Measure O would be 13.2 million, and in 21-22 it would be 14.5 million. And that is a critical component to creating that weaning schedule, obviously, how much revenue is coming in and then how much what the expenditures are. The good news is the COVID recession did not hit nearly as hard as we predicted. And that was not just our prediction as a city. As you know, if you've been paying attention to this nationally, there was a real concern about a true, very hard recession that did not actually come to pass. And so the current sales tax forecast is listed below. And the difference between what we forecasted a year ago and what we forecast now is in parentheses. So we now know that instead of the 13.2 million in 2021, the revenue forecast, and I know that's awkward to say that it's a forecast because that year has just ended, but we're still getting all the data in from sales tax. The forecast is 16.6 million, and therefore there is a $3.4 million difference, or $3.4 million more revenue coming into Measure O in 2021. And if you add up that difference across the board in the 9 years, we're looking at cumulatively Measure O bringing in $17 million more than we anticipated a year ago. But keep in mind, and this is a big caveat, that this could change again. We are not yet in a stable enough economy. We are not yet 100% out of this pandemic. And so there could be dips one more time in this revenue stream. Now, also due to the COVID prohibitions, some of the Measure O funded programs couldn't take place and the projects couldn't be constructed. And so the expenditures were also a little bit less than anticipated. There was one factor that we thought might be a greater factor in this weaning schedule than it likely has turned out to be, and that's Measure N. You will recall that Measure N set targets for the city's pavement condition index by certain dates, and if those dates were not reached in time, Measure O would expire early. Well, on June 25th, Judge Walsh issued a statement of intended decision finding Measure N invalid. And he stated, and I quote, Measure N invades this forbidden area of administration, intruding as it does on the City Council's power to set a budget. So the city is awaiting the judge's final decision on this matter. But it looks like the judge will find Measure N is invalid. And then the proponent has already filed an objection to the statement of intended decision and has stated publicly that he will likely appeal. So the threat to Measure O from Measure N is not yet resolved. But given that statement of intended decision and the way that the court seems to be headed, staff recommends that we assume Measure N will not terminate Measure O early. And if Judge Walsh or a higher court determines otherwise, we will adjust course at that time. So back to the weaning schedule, the question now, given the much better projections, given that there is a higher revenue stream and we're less concerned about will we be able to make the debt payments in 2031? Do we stop the weaning process altogether? Do we continue the weaning process, but in a less aggressive schedule? For example, weaning $500,000 per year instead of, you know, the 841,000, that schedule? Or do we just continue with the original weaning schedule? So the first option in stopping this process altogether, we are confident that there will be enough money in the Measure O fund, that there will be a positive fund balance, assuming that there are not new expenditures, if these current projections hold. Again, I want to put in that caveat that these are projections, and unfortunately, we don't have, you know, a crystal ball, and so the revenue may change. There may be less revenue than what we had anticipated, and there may not be enough for this fund balance to cover the debt payments. But where we now think this is going, we believe that this is enough. The problem, however, with stopping the weaning process is that at Measure O's termination, all the ongoing programs would still abruptly transfer to the general fund, and that would be a bit of a shock to the general fund. So staff does not recommend this option. Second option, we could continue the weaning process, but on a less aggressive schedule. So then at Measure O's termination, all the ongoing programs left over would still have to suddenly transfer. The other, it's just a little awkward. It's not really a problem, but it's a little awkward because between not weaning and having the mathematically determined weaning schedule, this new target would kind of be arbitrary. And then keep in mind, again, the revenue projections may still change. We are not in a fully stable economy, and we're not out of COVID quite yet. We are seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, but we're not there yet. So, you know, if we take this approach, we could take this approach and in 6 months have to change course all over again. So staff recommends option 3, which is to continue with the original weaning schedule. And So that means we gradually transition all the ongoing programs by the end of 2029, all of the ongoing programs, unless you recommend and the council determines that those programs shouldn't continue. But if you and the council want those programs to continue, they would continue. They would just be slowly transferred to the general fund. And then this is the steadier path while the economy is still volatile. And, you know, we will monitor what happens with the economy and the revenue, as well as the Measure O fund balance, to make sure that we are still making good use of that money. So the recommendation is that the Measure O Citizen Oversight Committee discuss and provide feedback as to what the city should do regarding Measure O weaning. And I look forward to your questions and feedback at the meeting. Thank you.